I never thought I would walk into a police station as a suspect. I had never even gotten a speeding ticket in my life. Yet there I was, 32 years old, wearing the same blazer I had put on that morning, thinking it was just another ordinary Tuesday, being escorted through a glass door with the words Detective Division printed in bold black letters above it. My hands would not stop shaking. I kept pressing them flat against my thighs, trying to make them still. It did not work. The fluorescent lights inside that building were too bright. Everything felt too loud, too sharp, too surreal. Like a nightmare where you know something is terribly wrong, but your feet will not let you run. I never imagined that the two people who taught me to be honest, who held my hand at church every Sunday, who told me that integrity was the only thing in this world no one could take from you, I never imagined that those two people would be the ones to hand my name over to the police like a piece of trash. And I never imagined that my father's own forgetfulness, a phone left face down on his office desk, still recording, would be the only thing standing between me and a life I did not deserve. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, because to understand what happened inside that courtroom, you first need to understand the life I had built, the family I had trusted, and the 5 years of my soul I had poured into a business that was never truly mine. My name is Serena, and this is the story of how the people I loved most in this world tried to bury me, and how the truth refused to stay buried. My parents, Gerald and Roslyn Harlow, were not wealthy people when I was growing up. We lived in a modest house on the edge of Maplewood Crest, a quiet town where everybody knew your name, and word traveled faster than the internet. My father drove a second-hand truck. My mother sewed curtains for extra income. But they had a dream, and in our household, dreams were taken seriously. When I was about 12 years old, my father started a small textile importing business from our garage. He called it Harlow and Company. At first, it was nothing: a few boxes, a couple of overseas contacts, a telephone that rang maybe twice a week. My mother kept the books in a yellow spiral notebook. I used to sit at the kitchen table doing my homework while she added up numbers by hand, whispering them under her breath like a prayer. By the time I was in high school, Harlow and Company had grown into something real. My father had leased a small warehouse. He had regular clients. He hired 2 employees. My mother moved her yellow notebook to an actual computer. I remember being so proud of them, so genuinely, deeply proud. I used to tell my friends, my father built something from nothing. That means something. It has to mean something. I have a younger brother named Marcus and a younger sister named Diane. Marcus is 3 years younger than me, and Diane is 5 years younger. Neither of them showed much interest in the business growing up. Marcus was always more interested in fast cars and his circle of friends. Diane had moved to a different city after college and built her own life there. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who cared. Looking back now, I can see that being the one who stays and the one who cares does not always protect you. Sometimes it simply makes you the most visible target. When I graduated from university with a degree in accounting and business administration, my father sat me down at the same kitchen table where my mother used to whisper her numbers. He looked at me with eyes that were soft and certain at the same time. He said, "Serena, this business is going to be yours one day. I need someone I can trust at the center of it. I need you." I was 27 years old. I had job offers from 2 respectable firms in the city. I turned them both down. I chose my family. For 5 years, I gave everything to Harlow and Company. I handled the financial accounts, the payroll, the vendor payments, the tax filings, the client invoices, and the quarterly reports. I worked late on Friday evenings when everyone else had gone home. I came in on Saturday mornings when there was a deadline. I renegotiated supplier contracts and saved the company over $60,000 in 1 year alone. I did not ask for a bonus. I did not ask for extra credit. I just worked, because I believed I was building something for my family's future, for my future. My husband Tom used to joke that Harlow and Company was my first marriage, and he was my second. I would laugh, but looking back now, I wonder if somewhere underneath the laughter, I already knew that something was quietly being taken from me, something I could not yet name. There were signs, I suppose, that I chose not to read too carefully. Small moments that I filed away under the category of family dynamics and moved on from. The way Marcus would sometimes appear in the office unannounced and spend an hour behind closed doors with my father. The way my mother would occasionally become evasive when I asked about the company's long-term plans. The way Gerald had stopped including me in certain supplier meetings over the last year. Meetings that I had previously always attended as the financial manager. I noticed these things. I told myself they were nothing. I told myself I was being oversensitive. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday in early autumn when my life came apart. The leaves on the maple trees lining the company parking lot had just started turning orange. I remember noticing them as I pulled in that morning, thinking how beautiful they looked, how peaceful everything seemed. I had a coffee in one hand and my laptop bag on my shoulder. I was thinking about a vendor call I had scheduled for 10 o'clock. I walked up to the main entrance and swiped my access card. The light on the reader flashed red. I frowned and tried again. Red again. I assumed it was a technical glitch. Those readers had been acting up for months. I knocked on the glass door and waved at Patty, our office assistant, who sat just inside the reception area. She saw me, and she looked away. That moment, that one small moment of her looking away, should have told me everything. But I was not ready to understand it yet. A security guard I had never seen before opened the door and asked me to follow him. He brought me to my father's office. Gerald was sitting behind his desk, his hands folded on top of a manila folder. He was wearing his dark gray suit, the one he only wore for serious meetings. My mother, Roslyn, was seated to the side, in the chair nearest the window. She did not look at me when I walked in. There was a third person in the room, a man in a navy blazer who introduced himself as an external auditor the company had hired. I did not understand why he was there. I did not understand any of it yet. My father cleared his throat. He opened the manila folder and pushed it across the desk toward me. He said in a voice I had never heard from him before, flat, rehearsed, almost cold. "Serena, our external audit has uncovered a significant financial discrepancy. Over the past 18 months, approximately $480,000 has been transferred out of the company's vendor sub-accounts. The audit trails all lead back to your login credentials. Every single transaction." I sat very still. I heard the words, but they did not connect to anything in my brain that made sense. It was like someone had said them in a foreign language and expected me to respond fluently. I said, "Dad, what are you talking about? I did not make those transfers." He said, "The evidence says otherwise." I looked at my mother. She was staring at her hands in her lap. She had not moved since I walked in. She had not looked at my face even once. I remember thinking, in that strange, slow way that the mind works when it is overwhelmed, that I had seen my mother's hands 1,000 times in my life. I had held those hands crossing the street as a child. I had watched those hands roll pastry dough at Christmas and tuck blankets around me when I was sick. And now those same hands were folded quietly in her lap while my father told me I was a thief. She could not even look at me. They handed me a termination letter. They asked me to return my access card and my company phone. The security guard stood by the door the entire time, as if they expected me to cause a scene, as if 32 years of being their daughter had suddenly turned me into someone who needed to be watched. I walked out of that building in a daze. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 40 minutes. I did not cry yet. I was too shocked to cry. The orange leaves on the maple trees were still beautiful. The world had not gotten the message that everything had just ended. By that evening, I had been removed from the family group chat. By the next morning, my aunt had called Tom to say she could not believe what Serena had done. By the end of the week, the police had called to schedule a formal interview. $480,000. My name, my reputation, my family's trust. All of it gone in a single Tuesday morning. And here is what I want to ask you if you are watching this right now. Have you ever had a moment where the people who were supposed to protect you were the ones holding the knife? Have you ever tried to defend yourself against an accusation so enormous, so unthinkable, that the words would not even come out of your mouth? Because that is exactly where I was. And I want you to keep that feeling in mind as I tell you what came next. People say that in a fair system, the truth always wins. I believed that too, until I was sitting across from a detective who was looking at a printed spreadsheet showing $480,000 leaving company accounts through my login, and I had to explain why it was not me. The truth does not speak for itself. Someone has to fight for it. Sometimes that fight nearly breaks you before it saves you. Tom drove me to the police station for both interviews. He held my hand in the car. He told me to answer everything honestly, to stay calm, to trust that the truth would come out. Tom is not a man of many words, but in those weeks, he gave me every word he had. I will never forget that. The detective was professional. He was not unkind, but he had a file in front of him, and the file did not look good for me. The transactions had been made from a computer inside the company during regular business hours. They had been authorized using my unique login credentials. The vendor accounts they originated from were accounts I managed directly. On paper, every single piece of the puzzle pointed straight at me. After the second police interview, I hired an attorney named Clara Weston. Clara was not a flashy lawyer. She did not have a corner office or a receptionist in designer clothes. She worked from a small office above a dry cleaning shop on Birchwood Avenue, and her desk was buried under folders and yellow sticky notes. But she listened to me for 2 full hours without interrupting. She asked sharp questions, and when I finished, she looked at me and said, "Someone used your credentials. That means one of 2 things. Either your login was hacked remotely, or someone inside that building who knew your password did this deliberately. Let us figure out which one." That became the foundation of everything. Clara and I spent weeks going through records. I pulled every bank statement, every transaction log, every authorization record I could legally access. Clara subpoenaed the rest. And as we laid everything out on her cluttered conference table, a picture started to form. A picture that made my stomach drop in a different way than before. The transactions had been made from inside the building, yes, but the IP address logs from the company's internal server showed something interesting. Several of the largest transfers, transactions totaling well over $200,000, had been executed from a device that was registered to a different user profile within the system. The login showed my credentials, but the device fingerprint did not match any machine I had ever used. Someone had obtained my username and password and used them from a different computer. A computer that, according to the internal registration records, had been assigned to the company's secondary office, a small room down the hall from my father's office that Marcus used whenever he came in. Marcus, my brother, who did not have an official role in the company, who showed up occasionally to have lunch with my father and look important, who had always watched me from a certain angle, not with brotherly pride, but with something I had never been able to identify until now. Clara said we had strong circumstantial evidence, but circumstantial evidence was not enough on its own. We needed something more. The civil court hearing was 3 weeks away. My parents' legal team, and yes, they had hired lawyers to go against their own daughter, was preparing to file a formal claim for damages. If they won, I would be looking at financial ruin on top of everything else. I was not sleeping more than 3 hours a night. I had lost 14 pounds. I had stopped answering phone calls from numbers I did not recognize because I never knew if it would be a reporter, a process server, or another relative calling to tell me what a disappointment I was. Tom would come home from work and find me sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, staring at nothing. He would sit down beside me, put his arm around me, and not say a word. Just sit. That was all I needed from him. Just someone to sit with me in the dark. The weeks following my termination were unlike anything I had experienced before. People talk about hitting rock bottom as though it is a single moment, a crash, a thud, an arrival. But the truth is that rock bottom is more like a slow descent through layers. You pass through shock first, then disbelief, then a frantic, desperate energy where you are calling lawyers and pulling records and telling yourself that this will be resolved quickly. And then, when that frantic energy exhausts itself, you reach the layer underneath it, the quiet gray layer where you wake up in the morning and you have to remind yourself that today is real, that this is actually happening, that you are not going to open your eyes and find it was a dream. I lived in that gray layer for a long time. The community of Maplewood Crest is not a large one. When your family is known, when your parents have been respected members of local business circles for decades, the story of their daughter being investigated for theft does not stay quiet. I started noticing it at the grocery store first. Familiar faces that used to offer a warm hello would find something very interesting to look at in a different direction as I passed. A woman I had known since childhood, someone whose wedding I had attended, crossed to the other side of the aisle rather than walk past me. I stood there for a moment, holding a box of cereal, pretending to read the ingredients, waiting for my face to stop burning. Tom noticed it too. He started doing more of the grocery runs himself without telling me why. I knew why. He was trying to protect me from the small, daily cruelties of a community that had decided what kind of person I was before the truth had any chance to speak. I loved him deeply for that. I also made him stop, because I decided about 3 weeks into the investigation that I was not going to hide. If I hid, it would look like guilt. I had done nothing wrong, and I was going to behave like someone who had done nothing wrong, even when everything around me was designed to make me feel otherwise. There is something that nobody tells you about being falsely accused of something serious. The isolation is almost worse than the accusation itself. It is not just that people stop trusting you. It is that you start to feel like you cannot trust your own memory. You go back over every transaction you ever processed. You second-guess every decision you ever made. You start asking yourself, could I have missed something? But then you catch yourself doing it and you feel angry because you know what you did and what you did not do. The doubt creeps in anyway. That is what sustained lies do to an innocent person. They burrow into you and set up residence before you even notice them. I want to ask you something. If you were in my position, if the evidence against you looked convincing, even though you knew the truth, would you keep fighting? Or would there come a point where you would start to wonder if giving up was easier? I am asking because I reached that point. I reached the moment where I sat in my car outside Clara's office and I thought, what if no one ever believes me? What if the truth is not enough? I want you to know that I understand how that feels, and I want you to know what happened next. It was a Thursday evening, 17 days before the civil court hearing, when my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. The voice on the other end was quiet, careful, almost a whisper. It said, "Serena, this is Patty. Patty from the office." Patty Caldwell was the office assistant at Harlow & Company. She had worked there for 6 years. She was a soft-spoken woman in her late 40s who kept a small, succulent plant on her desk and always remembered everyone's birthday. She was the one who had looked away when I was locked out that Tuesday morning. I had not spoken to her since. She said she needed to tell me something. She said she had been carrying it for weeks, and she could not carry it anymore. She said she was scared. Scared of losing her job. Scared of what might happen if the wrong people found out she had called me. But she said she could not watch an innocent person go down without saying something. There was a long pause on the line before she said that last part, and when she did say it, her voice broke slightly on the word, innocent. I will never forget how that word sounded coming from her, like it meant everything. I told her to take her time. I told her I was listening. She said that on the day I was fired, there had been a meeting in my father's office. Gerald, Roslyn, and Marcus were all in there together. Patty had been at her reception desk just outside. The door to my father's office had been pulled almost shut, but not completely. And at some point, without anyone noticing, my father's personal phone had been left sitting on the edge of his desk, face down. He had been recording a client call earlier that morning and had forgotten to stop the recording before his family meeting began. Patty had found out about it by accident. Gerald had left the office briefly during the meeting and had asked Patty to go in and grab a document from his printer. She had walked in, retrieved the document, and noticed his phone screen lit up showing an active recording. She had not said anything. She had just gone back to her desk. Later that afternoon, after everything with me had happened and the building was quieter, Gerald had come back to his office alone. He had picked up the phone, looked at it briefly, and deleted what he thought was the recording. But Patty had seen him look confused, like he was not sure the file had saved anywhere. He had muttered something under his breath and then set the phone down again. But here is the thing about that phone. It was one of those older models that automatically synced every file to a connected cloud account, including voice recordings. Gerald did not know that. He deleted the file from the phone, but the cloud had already saved a copy. Patty knew about the cloud sync because she had helped Gerald set up that account 2 years earlier when he was having trouble backing up his contacts. She had never mentioned it to him again. She had not thought about it again, until the day she watched me walk out of that building with a security guard at my elbow, and the look on my face that she said she had never seen on a person's face before. She had logged into the account. She still knew the password because Gerald had never changed it. She had found the audio file. She had listened to it. And then she had not slept properly for 3 weeks. She sent me the file that same night. I called Clara immediately. She drove to my house at 9:30 in the evening. Tom made coffee and then went upstairs because he understood that what was about to happen in our kitchen was something Clara and I needed to hear first, together, before anyone else. Clara plugged the audio file into her laptop. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table, the same table where, years ago, I used to do my homework while my mother counted numbers by hand. We pressed play. The recording was 41 minutes long. The first few minutes were muffled, chairs moving, papers shuffling, the sound of the door being pulled almost closed. And then, voices. 3 voices I would have recognized anywhere in the world. My father, my mother, my brother. What I am about to tell you is what was said in that room, and I need you to prepare yourself, because I sat at that kitchen table and I listened to every single word, and by the time the 41 minutes were over, I had aged 10 years. Marcus spoke first. He was asking about the timeline, whether the paperwork had been filed, whether the police had been contacted, whether everything was in place. My father confirmed it. My mother said she was nervous. My father told her to hold herself together, that it was too late to go back now. Marcus then said, and these are not his exact words, but the meaning was unmistakable, that they needed to make sure the story was consistent, that everything pointed to Serena, that the audit had already done the work for them, that all my father needed to do was confirm to the investigators that I had full access to those accounts, and nobody else did. My mother asked what would happen to me, and my father said in a voice so calm it was terrifying that I would be dealt with through the legal process, that the business needed to move forward, that Marcus was ready to take over the financial management role, and with me out of the picture, the succession plan could proceed without complications. There was a pause, and then Marcus said, clear as day, clear as anything I have ever heard in my life. It was easy enough to use her login. She never changed her password. Nobody is going to look past the credentials. Trust me. My mother made a sound, a small, wounded sound, like she knew what she was agreeing to carry. And then my father said, good, then it is settled. Serena took the money. That is the story. It stays the story. Clara stopped the recording. She looked at me across the table. Neither of us said anything for a long moment. My father had known. My mother had known. They had not discovered that I had stolen money. They had constructed a story, built it deliberately, brick by careful brick, to push me out of a business I had helped build so that Marcus could step into my place without resistance. They had used 5 years of my trust as the foundation of their lie. The morning I received Patty's audio file and sat in my kitchen listening to it with Clara, I was wearing an old gray cardigan that I had owned since university. Afterward, when Clara had gone and Tom had come back downstairs, and I was standing at the kitchen sink not quite seeing anything in front of me, I looked down at that cardigan and thought, I am going to have to decide what kind of person I am going to be after this. Because a thing like this changes you. It would be dishonest to say it does not. The question is whether it changes you into someone harder, or someone wiser, or something else entirely that you cannot predict yet. I did not have the answer that night, but I stored the question away. I knew I would need it later. I want to ask you this, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. How do you grieve someone who is still alive? How do you mourn a parent who is standing in front of you, breathing, when the person you thought they were has turned out to be someone who never truly existed? Because that is the grief that settled into my chest that night. Not anger, not even shock anymore. Just a quiet, heavy grief, like something in me had finally accepted a truth it had been resisting for a very long time. The morning of the civil court hearing arrived with gray skies and cold air. I dressed carefully. I chose a deep blue blouse and dark trousers. I wanted to look composed, even if every part of me underneath was not. Tom fixed my collar before I left the house. He held my face in both his hands for a moment and said, "Whatever happens in there today, I know who you are. I know exactly who you are." That was enough. That was more than enough. The courtroom at the Maplewood Crest Civil Court building was not large. Wooden benches, fluorescent lights, the smell of old paper and floor polish. It held maybe 60 people, and it was nearly full. Family members who had turned their backs on me over the past weeks were seated on my parents' side of the gallery. A few friends of Tom's family sat behind us. Clara placed her files neatly on our table and clicked her pen twice, her habit when she was ready. My parents entered with their attorney, a tall man named Mr. Aldridge, who wore expensive shoes and spoke in the tone of someone who was accustomed to winning. He was confident because he had reviewed the audit report, reviewed the transaction logs, and seen what looked like an airtight case. He had no idea what was sitting in Clara's laptop bag. Marcus sat in the gallery, not at the legal table. He was dressed neatly, but he had not been able to look still since he walked in. He kept shifting in his seat. He kept glancing at the door. I noticed these things because I had spent 5 years in the same building as him, and Marcus's body language was reading like a ledger full of errors. The judge, an even-tempered woman named Judge Aldine Prescott, called the hearing to order. Mr. Aldridge presented the plaintiff's case first, the audit findings, the transaction records, the login credentials, the financial trail. He was thorough. He was persuasive. 2 of my relatives in the gallery nodded along as he spoke. My mother sat very straight, her hands folded, her expression composed. My father stared at the table in front of him. Then it was Clara's turn. She stood. She thanked the court. She said, "Your Honor, before I present the defense's case, I would like to submit a piece of evidence that was obtained legally and recently, which I believe will significantly reframe the nature of this proceeding." She handed the court clerk the formal documentation. She said, "I am requesting permission to play an audio recording in this courtroom." Mr. Aldridge objected immediately. He demanded to know where the recording had come from, whether it had been obtained with consent, whether it was admissible. Clara was prepared for every question. She had filed the proper documentation 3 days earlier. The cloud account was legally registered in Gerald Harlow's name. The recording had been made on his own personal device. Clara had the relevant case precedents prepared and submitted them to the court without hesitation. She had been waiting for this moment, and she was completely ready. Judge Prescott reviewed the documentation. She reviewed Clara's precedent citations. She asked 2 clarifying questions, and then she said, "The recording will be admitted. You may proceed." Clara opened her laptop. She connected it to the courtroom's audio system. She looked at me once across the table. I gave her the smallest nod I could manage. She pressed play. The sound that came through those courtroom speakers was ordinary at first. Rustling, chairs, a door, and then voices. 3 voices that everyone in that room, family members, the attorneys, the judge, every single person in those wooden gallery benches, 3 voices that almost everyone present recognized immediately. The room did not make a sound. I kept my eyes forward. I heard every word as if for the second time, and somehow it was worse the second time, in that room, with all those people hearing it too. My father's voice, arranging the story. My mother's small, wounded sound. And Marcus, calm and assured. It was easy enough to use her login. She never changed her password. Nobody is going to look past the credentials. Trust me. Someone in the gallery gasped. Then someone else. Then the sound of it spread through the room like a wave. I heard a chair scrape behind me. I heard someone say, "Oh my Lord." I did not turn around. I kept my eyes on the judge. And then I heard it. A sharp, sudden sound. The sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Followed by voices rising, followed by the bailiff moving quickly. My father's voice, alarmed, not composed now, not rehearsed now, saying, "Roslyn! Roslyn!" My mother had fainted. She had simply gone. The weight of what was playing through those speakers had taken every last piece of her composure and collapsed it. She slid from her chair and the courtroom erupted. Judge Prescott called for order. A recess was called. Medical personnel were summoned. In the chaos of those few minutes, I sat very still at the defense table. Clara placed her hand briefly on my arm. I stared straight ahead, and from the corner of my eye, I saw my father turn, slowly, the way a person turns when they have nothing left to pretend, and look at me. Truly look at me, for the first time since that Tuesday morning in his office. I did not look away from him. I held his gaze. And I want you to know, I did not feel triumph in that moment. I felt something much quieter than that. I felt the specific sadness of watching someone choose who they were going to be and realizing they had chosen long before this day. Marcus had gone completely still in the gallery. He was not fidgeting anymore. He was not glancing at the door. He was sitting with his hands on his knees, staring at a fixed point on the floor, like a man who had just realized the walls around him had disappeared. When the recess ended and the proceedings resumed, everything had changed. The energy in that room was different. The family members in the gallery who had been nodding along with Mr. Aldridge were now sitting with their hands in their laps, looking at my parents with expressions I cannot easily describe. It was the look of people rearranging what they thought they knew. And I want to stop here and ask you, when the truth finally comes out after a long silence, is it ever as satisfying as you imagined it would be? I had spent weeks dreaming about a moment like this, a moment when everyone would hear the truth and finally understand. But sitting in that courtroom, I felt more empty than I did victorious, because the people on that recording were not strangers. They were my parents. And you cannot fully celebrate a victory built on the ruins of something you once loved. The civil hearing was adjourned pending a full review by the court and a referral to the prosecutor's office. Clara had already prepared a separate criminal complaint, which she filed the following morning. Within 2 weeks, both Gerald and Marcus had been formally charged. My father with conspiracy to commit fraud and filing false reports, Marcus with financial fraud, unauthorized access to financial accounts, and conspiracy. The charges were serious. Both hired criminal defense attorneys. My mother cooperated with investigators. I was told, through Clara, that Roslyn had said she had not fully understood the extent of what Marcus had done, that she had been told by Gerald only days before my firing, and that she had not felt she could go against her husband. Whether that is entirely true, I do not know. Roslyn has always been a woman who existed in the orbit of other people's decisions. I think she genuinely could not find the will to stand against my father, even when standing against him would have meant protecting her daughter. That knowledge sits with me differently on different days. Some days I feel sorrow for her. Some days I feel anger. Most days I feel both at the same time, tangled together in a way I cannot separate. In exchange for her full cooperation, my mother's legal exposure was reduced significantly. She was not charged criminally, though she did face civil consequences related to the case. She spent 2 weeks with my sister Diane in another city afterward. Diane called me once. She said she was sorry. She said she had not known. I believed her. I told her I believed her, and that I would need time. Harlow and Company was placed under court-ordered financial review. Operations were frozen while the forensic accountants worked through 18 months of records. The business that my father had started in a garage, that my mother had kept in a yellow spiral notebook, that I had given 5 years of my professional life to building, it was now in the hands of strangers with court orders and spreadsheets. I received my full legal clearance 6 weeks after the hearing. The official documentation arrived by courier on a gray Wednesday afternoon. Clara called me the moment she received her copy. She said, "Serena, it is over. Your name is clear. I am so proud of you." And she said it with the particular warmth of someone who had sat in a small office above a dry cleaning shop and believed me when very few people did. I stood in my hallway, holding the clearance letter, and I waited to feel something enormous. Relief, perhaps. Joy. The kind of rush you might expect after months of carrying something impossibly heavy. But what I felt was quieter than any of that. It was the feeling of being able to breathe again, slowly, carefully, like someone who has been holding their breath so long they have forgotten how the air is supposed to feel. Tom came home to find me sitting on the floor of the hallway, back against the wall, letter in my lap. He sat down on the floor beside me without saying anything, just like he had been doing through all the dark evenings at the kitchen table. Just sitting. I put my head on his shoulder, and we stayed there for a long time. The relatives who had called me a thief, who had removed me from family gatherings, who had whispered behind their hands about what Serena had done, they did not know how to face me after the truth came out. One aunt left a voicemail that was mostly silence, with a few halting words in the middle that never quite assembled themselves into an apology. I chose not to respond to most of them, not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation. There is a kind of energy you have to protect after something like this, a small, careful flame inside you that the experience nearly extinguished. I was not willing to spend that energy managing other people's guilt. They had made their choices at a moment when the choices mattered. I had made mine. Those two things could simply exist alongside each other without requiring a conversation. I have not spoken to my father since the courtroom. I do not know if I ever will. I have thought about it many times. The kind of thinking you do at 2 in the morning when the house is quiet and the weight of something unresolved presses down on you. I have thought about what I would say to him. I have thought about whether hearing him explain himself would change anything, or whether it would only reopen something I am slowly, carefully learning to close. I have not arrived at an answer. I suspect I may not for a very long time. I spoke to my mother once, 4 months after everything. She called me from a different phone number. I think she was afraid I would not pick up if I saw her name. I almost did not, but I answered. She said, "Serena, I am sorry." That is what she said. 3 words and then silence. I said, "I know, Mom." And then I said, I was not ready to talk yet. And I hung up. That was not a dramatic moment. There was no shouting. There were no tears. Just 3 words from a woman who once whispered numbers by hand in a yellow notebook while I did my homework at the kitchen table. And 3 words back from her daughter, who still loves her, in the complicated way that daughters love their mothers, even when the love has been broken into pieces that no longer fit together the way they once did. Tom and I are doing better now. We had our hard months, the kind of hard that sneaks into a marriage when the outside world is pulling on it too hard for too long. We had evenings where we were too tired to speak and too sad to be kind. We had a Saturday in February where we sat across from each other in a coffee shop and just looked at each other and admitted that we were both exhausted in a way that sleep was not fixing. We got through it. We are still getting through it. A good marriage is not the absence of hard times. It is the decision, made again and again on ordinary days, to stay. I found a new position 6 months after my clearance, a financial management role with a logistics firm on the other side of Maplewood Crest, a company with no family history attached to it, no complicated loyalties, no weight from the past sitting in every corner of every room. I go to work. I do my job. I come home. Some days that simplicity feels like the most extraordinary luxury I have ever been given. Patty Caldwell, the woman who made one quiet, frightened phone call that changed everything. She left Harlow & Company shortly after the investigation began. She sent me a card a few months later. It was a plain white card with a simple message inside. It said, "I could not let them win. I hope you are doing okay." I keep that card in the top drawer of my desk at my new job. I look at it sometimes when I need to be reminded that the right thing, done quietly and at great personal cost, is still the right thing. People have asked me since everything happened whether I regret the 5 years I gave to that business, whether I feel foolish for turning down those job offers, for choosing family over opportunity, for pouring so much of myself into something that was ultimately used against me. I have thought about this question carefully, and my honest answer is no. I do not regret those years. I regret what was done to me during them. Those are two different things. I worked hard and I worked honestly. The fact that someone else chose to betray that does not take away from who I was in those years. I was a good financial manager. I was a loyal daughter. I was a hard worker. None of that became untrue just because someone tried to rewrite the story. And now I want to ask you one final question, because everything I have shared with you today has been building toward this. What do you do with a story like this? What do you do when you have survived something that should not have happened to you, when you have been to the bottom of something and made it back to the surface? I do not think the answer is to become hard. I tried hard for a while. It did not suit me, and it did not help me. I do not think the answer is to become bitter. Bitterness is just grief that has stopped moving. And I do not think the answer is to forgive quickly, or to forgive on someone else's timeline, because forgiveness, real forgiveness, not the performed kind, takes time that nobody else gets to schedule for you. What I have arrived at, slowly and imperfectly, is this. You carry the story with you. You do not pretend it did not happen. You do not dress it up into something with a neat ending and a bow on top. You carry it honestly, with both hands, and you let it teach you what it has to teach you. And then, on the days when you are strong enough, you put it down for a while, and you live. I am Serena. I was accused of stealing $480,000 from my family's business. My parents told everyone. The police questioned me. I almost did not make it through. But my father left his phone recording on his desk, and the truth, the stubborn, persistent, unstoppable truth, found its way out. I am still here. I am still standing. And if you are carrying something heavy today, if someone has told a story about you that is not true, if the evidence seems to be stacked against you, if the people who should have been in your corner somehow ended up standing against you, I want you to hear this from someone who has been there. Keep going. The truth is heavier than a lie. It takes longer to move, but it moves. It always moves.